Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf ayin bet. A few announcements. First of all, there's a lot of material up on the daf that's gone up in the last while. I, by the way, haven't mentioned all the ones that I did when I was recording, so you can go look back if you haven't seen them. But I'll mention a few that went up in the last few days, which is Shula Mishkan's article on flashback about wine and the making of wine and vineyards and all that. The Gefet went up about what we ended with yesterday. About there are actually two that went up. One about the laws of theft of Jews and non-Jews, which was our last topic of yesterday, and a general one about stam yanam, what, when, why. Interesting questions. There's some din and dafs up. The last one, I believe, is tam kikar, we dealt with just recently. So a lot of interesting topics. If you have time, these are topics because we've been talking about stam yayin, nesech, and all that for a while. It's good to kind of have the in-depth look at it, which is very useful. Okay, the Siyum coming up on Tuesday. Very exciting program. We're looking forward. Please make sure note that the time is different than usual because we're doing the Hebrew and the English on the same night. So beware that it's not the usual time, which is 8:30 usually in Israel. It's not. Okay, it's at 7 at night in Israel, wherever that will be, wherever you are. So pay attention to that. And stay tuned for the upcoming Siyum soon after that, okay, which will be on the 14th. And like I said, there'll be a live one on the 15th in Hebrew in Israel and Jerusalem. So we hope to see many of you there. Okay, let's get started. Enough announcements. We ended with this. Let's go back for a quick minute and just talk about our topic of yesterday, which was Mashicha. Is Mashicha koneh for a non-Jew or not, right? The whole issue of Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish, Ma'ok Konod, and all that, we had that not so long ago. And now we're really getting to specifically the issue of Mashicha itself. Is Mashicha koneh? Is it not koneh? Okay, even if you say Mashicha is koneh, it could be you think money is also koneh for akum. And if you think Mashicha is not koneh, then obviously money is koneh. Okay, so we can put the money issue aside for right now, but it's a big machloket. Ameimar says Mashicha works. And again, Mashicha would include Hagbahah, lifting, and all that, everything we saw yesterday. And Rav Ashi says no. So we brought one difficulty against Ameimar. We resolved it. Two difficulties against Rav Ashi. We resolved them. But the second one that we resolved, we're now going to undo the resolution. Okay? So I'm going to start off. Let's just review it. So we said that a ben noach is killed if they, again, ben noach is killed for any avera that they do, any of the 7 noach hadlas. And, that was a whole sugya in Sanhedrin. And then we said they get accused for stealing something less than a shefa pruta. So then we said, and they can't return it. So now they say, well, if you say Mashicha bovei kochavim eina koneh, if you say they didn't, then if they didn't acquire it, then why would they get killed for this? There's no act of acquiring by them pulling it because they didn't buy it. There was no money, They just took it. The only way to actually acquire it is by pulling it. If it's not really theirs, just happens to be they stole something of yours, but it's really still yours and it's in their domain, then why would they get killed? And the answer is because they were tzarei Israel. They caused distress to a Jew by stealing. It's always distressing when somebody steals something from you, and on account of that, they get punished. So then the Gemara says, wait. So Rav Ashi now has to explain. Umay lo nitan lehishavon. Now, how am I going to explain this term then? Eino nitan lishavon. Eino nitan lishavon sounds like you have to return it, but you can't. But if it's not even the non-Jews, then they don't even have to return it. In other words, we just said Mashiach is not koneh. If Mashiach is not koneh, then how do I explain lo nitan lishavon? They mean eino b'torah tishavon. It can't be ever returned because you didn't really steal it. You can't return something that you didn't steal. Again, technically it was stolen, but halachically, if there was no kinyan, then it actually still belongs to the Jew. It's like the non-Jew has the Jew's item in their house. So that doesn't need returning. Again, halachic returning. I'm returning from my domain to your domain. It still needs to physically be returned, but that's something different. Saying since there's no kinyan, it can't be returned. But now we come up with the big difficulty of Rav Ashi, and from here we're actually going to reject Rav Ashi's opinion. Because Ihachiyem Aseifa. This sounded very good, but you didn't read till the end of the Breita. The Breita that talked about the Ben Noach Neraga Pachom Shavapruta V'lo Nitan Le'Shavon continued to say, Ba Chavero Nitala Mimenu Neherag Alav. Now, if you're going to say, so what happens in the second part of the Breita? if after the non-Jew steals the item from me and is liable to death penalty, if someone steals the item from that non-Jew, they're also liable to death penalty. Now, something Rav Ashi just said doesn't make any sense. Bishlam Aresha Mishum Ditzare L'Yisrael. The first non-Jew, we understand, caused distress to a Jew. Ela Seifa, my Avid. But the second person did nothing, because what did they do? They didn't steal, they didn't upset the Jew, because the Jew already was stolen from. And the non-Jew that they stole from, it wasn't their item. According to Rav Ashi, the item still belongs to the Jew. So they took an item that belonged to a Jew that was sitting in that person's house, and they took it. You shouldn't get the death penalty for that. That's not called theft. Theft is taking something that was in someone's domain and you stole it. Sounds pretty clear that Mashiach is Koneh, and that therefore the first non-Jew who stole it acquired it. When someone steals it from them, they're actually stealing something that belonged to somebody else, and on that account of that, they get killed. And therefore, Ela Shma Mina, Mashiach B'Ovei Kochavim Koneh, Shma Mina. And therefore, you must conclude that Mashiach is Koneh for a non-Jew. And that seems to be the very clear conclusion of the sugya. Now, as I said before, there's still a bunch of open things. Number one, even if Mashiach is Koneh, it might also mean that paying money is Koneh for a non-Jew, even though it doesn't work for a Jew that way. And that's based on the whole other sugya about Ma'od, Konod, and all that. Then there's a further issue of Rashi's opinion. Rashi, for some reason, takes the opinion of Rav Ashi and quotes, even though Rav Ashi is rejected by the Gemara, Rashi quotes, only money acquires for a non-Jew based on other sugyot, accepts Rav Ashi's position here, even though the Gemara kind of says, the Gemara never says the halacha is not like him, but it does say this makes it pretty clear that Mashiach is not Koneh, and Mashiach is Koneh, and yet Rashi paskins that way. So that's just an interesting point to note. Okay, we're going to move on. Now we're back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was discussing this case. So again, it all had to do with the fact that once you say yayin nesech is forbidden to benefit from, which we already said maybe, according to many Ashkenazi poskim, is not true anymore today. Well, you have to be cautious about when you're selling to them, right? And make sure that they don't offer it as up as a libation before the sale is done, is before the kinyan is done, for the act of acquisition. Otherwise, you're going to end up getting money for benefiting from yayin nesech. So, what the Mishnah determined, the key critical element is pasak, right? Which we then had to explain according to Rav Ashi, but it's the best way to put it is that pasak is a prerequisite. It has to be there. Now, you might need money, according to Rav Ashi, and Mashiach, according to Amemar, but you definitely need pasak. Without pasak, without agreeing on a price, there's no kinyan, because nobody, and that's what we talked about yesterday, finished yesterday's daf with this idea, nobody will definitely agree to something before they know what the item's going to cost. In light of that, we're going to have some situations. Now, our Mishnah is specifically about yayin nesech. The question is going to be, is this a law specifically in yayin nesech? Because yayin nesech in general, we're very strict. Or is this in general? And that's going to be our question. So to get to that question, we're going to have some situations that happened. Hahu gavra da amar lechavre. Somebody said to their friend, if I decide to sell my land, I'm going to sell it to you. And by the way, the commentaries say they did a kinyan. They did like a handkerchief, some sort of symbolic act. I will sell it to you. Notice what's missing here. No price. Now went that first person and sold it to somebody else. So Amar Rav Yosef, Kanakama. Rav Yosef said it's very clear. The first person has rights. They did a kinyan. Undo the second sale, sell it to the first person. Amar le Abaye, v'halo pasak. Abaye says, what are you talking about? It wasn't a done deal. There was no arrangement of price. Umanat de kol hechad lo pasak lo kana. What's my proof that without psika, there's no act of acquiring? Our Mishnah. Ditznan, hamocher yeno lo ve'kochavim. Sell your wine to a non-Jew. Pasak ad shalom adad. As long as you agreed on the price, even if you didn't measure it, damav mutarim. You're allowed to take the money for it because it'll be yayin nesech after already the kinyan goes into effect. Madad ad shalom pasak. But if you measured it before you set a price, damav asalin, you can't take money for that. Can't get paid. So we have a machloket, Rav Yosef, Abaye. Rav Yosef says the first sale is good, and Abaye says that sale wasn't anything because there was no arrangement. There was no agreement about price. So now the Gemara asks, "My havi'ala." So what's the law? To which the Gemara says, "My havi'ala." What do you mean? We just quoted the Mishna. The Mishna is very clearly obvious. Obviously, Abaye is right. Well, and that goes back to what I mentioned, which is maybe it's just a chumrah for yayin nesech, and maybe it's not true in regular acts of acquiring. So now they want to bring a different situation to try to prove it. Tashma, the Amar of Idi Barav, and they want to get to and they're going to conclude is it's the same thing. Psika is important in other areas as well, in selling anything else. And we're going to learn from Rav Idi Baravin, who said that Uvada Havabe Rav Chisda, he said there was a case like this that was brought in front of Rav Chisda. We'll see the case, right? It's a similar case where someone promised land and then sold it to somebody else. And Rav Chisda be Rav Huna, Rav Chisda brought it to Rav Huna's baby drash. He didn't know how to answer it. Upashte meha, and Rav Huna answered it from the following source, and he quoted a different Mishna, a Mishna in Bava Batra, Bava Batra Pehei Amubed. Ditnan Mashach Chamal. Okay, before I read the case, we're talking about a case where I ordered something. I asked some people to bring, I had people carry, produce, let's say, from the shuk to bring to me to sell. Okay. They come to my door, and they're going to give me the produce that we arranged. Okay, so mashach chamaravu po'alav. So I have either my donkey riders that I sent to go buy me the stuff, or my po'alim or workers that I sent. And I did mashicha on the people that are carrying the produce. And I bring them into my house. Now, there's what we call a kinyan chatzir. Okay, if it's in my house. Okay, but what's the issue here? What's the mashicha is I pull people, and the people are carrying the produce. Now you might think, okay, transitive property. I move the people are holding the produce. Sounds like it should work. Rashi says no, there's no such thing as mashicha by units. Okay, it doesn't work. Mashicha works by objects, not humans. This mashicha is useless. So I pull them into my house. The fact that they're now in my house and I pull them in, irrelevant. There's no kinyan. So therefore, bein pasak ad shelo madad, bein madad ad shelo pasak lo kana. There's two things that still have to happen. We have to agree on a price. We apparently haven't agreed on a price yet, or maybe not. And also it has to be measured out. Let's say I told them, bring me a kilo, but they didn't measure it in the shuk. They're going to measure it in my house. Okay, it's not like we would typically, right, when you order from a fruit store and they deliver it to you, right? You order exactly what you want. They don't start measuring it in your house, but this is obviously a different situation. So it doesn't matter what happened. It's all irrelevant because there's no kinyan at all. It's not even considered in your house, even though technically it is, because you pulled it in with mashicha of people, which isn't meaningful. But if they themselves, perkan, they unloaded their stuff, and they brought it into your house, or you brought it into the house, doesn't matter who brings it in, somebody brings it in, it's now a kinyan chatzir. But what? There's a prerequisite though. Pasak ad shalom madad, ein shneim yicholim lachzor. If they already had arranged at a price, even though they hadn't measured out, right, let's say they brought in 2 pounds worth of potatoes, and you only ordered 1 pound. So they haven't yet measured, but 1 pound of those potatoes are yours, and you can't renege on them. But as long as you arranged at what price you were paying for those potatoes before they brought them in your house, or before you measured them, madad ad shelo pasak. But if you measured them and didn't agree on a price, shnehem yicholim lachzor behem. Everyone can change their minds, even if you measured them, even if they're in your house, as long as there's no arrangement of price. There's no kinyan, and there you have it. So it's obviously applicable in other areas as well. Okay. Another case. If I sell my land, now in this case, what do you see? Gave a price. We're going to sell it for, I will sell it to you, only to you, and I will sell it to you for 100 zuz. Now you see the case is different. Then the person went and sold it to somebody else for 120. Amarav Kahana, obviously, Kanakama. There was an arrangement. And again, they did a kinyan. Okay, they don't say so, but obviously without a kinyan, it's really not meaningful. You had to have done some act of acquiring. They did, one of these handkerchief transactions. But, so Rav Kahana says, of course, the first transaction is valid. He has to get back the land for the other person. Won't get his 120, he'll get his 100 from the first person. However, very interestingly, Mat Kifla Rav Yaakov in a harpakod. Hi Zuze on Suhu. Wait, but the prices have pushed him to renege on his deal. that's a different story. If you could get more money for your land, you're allowed to do that. You only were committing if that was the price that someone else was going to pay, but you didn't mean if you got a better offer. It's very interesting. Now I wonder how much time elapsed here, right? Because when you're talking about land fluctuates in value a lot. And it makes sense if I talk to you and I said, listen, when I sell you my house, I'll sell it to you for 100 zuz. And then, somehow the price is like, let's say it's 3 years later. You can't really hold me to that. So, and perhaps what they're saying is everybody, because what's the idea here? Was there really a kinyan? When they did that handshake, did they, the handkerchief, did they really, I was trying to put it into our kind of terms, like you would shake on something. But were they really intending if the price really goes up and if I get a better price, obviously I'll sell it for a better price. That's how the world functions. So it wasn't, remember, it's not like I'm selling it today. I was saying, if in the event I decide to sell my land, I'll sell it to you for this amount. Yeah. So Rav Yaakov in a Harpakot says that doesn't go. Rav Yaakov in a Harpakot, and we actually paskin like him. Amarle, now, okay. This whole sugya has been based on we set a price. Now we assume set a price means like here, set a price. We said it's going to be, X per kilo or whatever, right? 100 for the house. But what if we said there's another kind of pasak? Amar le kiddeshayme betlata. I say I'm willing to pay you whatever 3 people assess this to be, and then whatever the 3 people assess, that's psika also. But now we're going to go into a whole bunch of different languages and what each language means if I say the following words. So if I said, like they assess with 3, now 3 is usually, when we hear the number 3 in 3 people assessing, what do you immediately think of? A court. Beit din is 3, right? Especially assessments are done often by the court. So how do courts work? 3 judges, we go by majority. So since I said like 3 people assess, I didn't mean that all 3 people have to give the exact same assessment. What I meant was, afilu treim go tlata. Even 2 out of 3. So if 2 say one and the third says another, we go with the 2, and that's the price that we committed to. But if I say kida amre betlata, I don't say as 3 assessed. I say like 3 people say ad amre betlata. I have to have agreement among 3 people in order for it to be the amount, in order for us to say that's the amount we were discussing. Okay, so because I changed my language and I said 3 people said, already that doesn't sound as much like a court, even though 3 does sound like a court, but assessment of 3 sounds like a court. If I just say 3 people say, that's a different story. But if I said kiddeshayme ba'arba'ah, if I said like 4 people assessed, ada amre ba'arba'ah, then you have to have all 4 people agreeing, because if I wanted majority court, that kind of thing, I would have said 3. The fact that I changed from the typical and said I want 4, I obviously meant that I wanted something more. I wanted more agreement of 4 people, and you need all 4 people to agree and not 3 out of 4. And obviously, and obviously if I said like 4 people say, if 3 people say, if 3 people say, and I mean it has to be 3, then obviously if I say 4, then it has to be 4. Amarle, kiddeshayme betlata. What if I said, like 3 people assess, and 3 people come and give the assessment, and the other one says, I want to bring a different 3, because I trust them more. So Rav Papa dinahu dema'akev. So Rav Papa says, I actually realized I just explained this wrong in the Hebrew. Okay, I did it flipped. Rav Papa says he can insist on 3 other people doing this. Okay, he could say, I'm going to change to those 3 people. No, I just got confused again. Did it the way I said. Then let me just make sure. I think it's the opposite. Dinu dema'akev, the first person could not allow it. I think that's what it is. 1 second. Let me just double check. Don't confuse these. Oh no, I was right. Okay. It is dinu dema'akev. The second person can stop them from doing it. Can say, no, I want my 3 to do it. And then they say, Mat kifla, Rav Huna braid Rav Yoshua, but Rav Huna comes and says, Mimai dahane kim leitfei. How do you know the second ones are better than the first ones? Dil mahane kim leitfei. Maybe the first ones are better, and nobody really has any rights to change it. In other words, whoever comes first, they're the ones who assess when we go by. And Hilchataka Rav Huna braid Rav Yoshua. And halacha is like Rav Huna. Okay, so we have this debate. Now, you just have to think about this a little bit. Why would you even think that the first one can insist, that the second person can insist, I want other people. It's because when you say, I want 3 people, you didn't say what 3 people. If you had agreed on specifically these 3 people that you both trust, then for sure, there's nothing to discuss. But if you didn't agree on the people, they could say, I didn't mean those 3. I meant a different 3. Okay, and the other one says, what do you mean? You said 3. It's any 3, and once 3's come, you can't change that. And that's the way we paskin. Now we're moving on to the next Mishnah. Natal et hamashpech. We're back to real yayin nesech. Okay, we're pouring wine. And what we have in this case is we take a mashpech. So the Jew is giving wine. We're continuing the case from the last Mishnah. Selling wine to a non-Jew, or maybe giving, doesn't really matter. The non-Jew brings their vessels, which might have yayin nesech at the bottom of them. The Jew pours through a funnel. Okay, it's a good way to make sure the water doesn't splatter all over the place. He's pouring through a funnel, or she's pouring through a funnel. And madal litzot tzlochito shel ovei kochavim. So it goes from the barrel to the funnel into the vessel, into the jug of the non-Jew. V'chazar umadal letoch tzlochito shel Yisrael. And then the Jew now, after they're done using the funnel for the non-Jew, uses the funnel for the Jew. Im yesh bo akevet yayin asur. If there are drops of wine left in the funnel from the first pouring, then the second pouring, all the wine is forbidden because there's an assumption there's yayin nesech in there. Now it's a little bit strange because only kosher wine went through the funnel, so we're going to have to wait to the Gemara to figure out what's going on here. Where's the non-kosher wine coming from? Hama'aret mikli el kli. Okay, it sounds like they're talking about here that a Jew is taking his vessel, pouring it into the non-Jew's vessel, similar but without this funnel, it's just pouring from one vessel to another. Et she'ira mimenu mutal, ve'et she'ira letocho asur. What is still in et she'ira mimenu, whatever's in the upper vessel, where the Jew's wine was to begin with, is totally fine. And whatever it went into the non-Jew's vessel is forbidden. So now the Gemara is going to start off outside of our topic, and then we're going to connect it. Tnan hatam. There's a Mishnah in Taharot, and we talked about this yesterday, about this issue of nitzok, about the pouring and the stuff being connected at the top and the bottom, and if the bottom becomes impure, then the top is impure. And that was for Tum and Tara, but also theoretically here. So now we're going to read the Mishnah on this. Hanitzok v'kataf, hard word to say, katafres, umashke tofeach, eino chibur lo l'tumah v'lo l'tahara. If you have a stream of water going, okay, like pouring, and the bottom, let's say, goes into an impure vessel, becomes impure, what's at the top is not considered connected. Not for tumah, not for tara, okay, not to also be metameh, something else, for example, not just to become tameh, but also to say something's tahor, because v'hakafteras, which is water streaming down on a slope, or mashket tofeach, something has moisture on it, but it's not enough to get something else wet. Okay, like if something else were to touch it, it wouldn't transfer liquid to something else. All those cases are not chibur lo l'tumah lo l'tara. We don't view them as connected. So again, the important part for us is this stream that's going. What's at the top is not connected to what's at the bottom. The bottom could be impure, the top could be pure. But if you have like a pond or sitting water, chibur l'tumah l'tara. So if one side of that pond becomes impure, the rest of it is impure. It's all considered connected. It's very logical. Amar Rav Huna, nitzok v'katafres umashket tofeach chibur le'inyan yayin nesech. Now here Rav Huna comes up and says something which is going to trouble everybody, which is it does work for, meaning it does view it as connected for yayin nesech purposes. So if you're pouring, what's at the top is going to be connected to what's at the bottom. So now they want to know, Amar le Rav Nachman le Rav Huna. Rav Nachman says to Rav Huna, Menalacha, where do you get this from? And he starts one source after the other. We're going to go in order. Mishnah and Tarot, first line in our Mishnah, second line in our Mishnah, and then a Braita. Okay? And from none of these four sources are we going to be able to come up with our answer. In the end, we're going to be left without an answer. And then the Rishonim, we're going to have this deliberation. Do we hold like him or not? If you want to derive it from the Mishnah, because what does it say there? Notice, I didn't read it carefully enough for you before, but what does it say? These three things, right? The nitzok, the katafres, the mashket tofeach. is not chibur. Now here come the key words. Lo l'tumah velo l'tahara. Not for tumah purposes, not for tahara purposes. Notice what it does say, notice what it doesn't say. L'tumah u'letahara hu delo havi chibur. It's not chibur specifically for those things. But ha l'inyan nesech havi chibur. But you would say then, for nesech though, maybe it is chibur, and maybe we can infer it from the Mishnah. What's the problem? Classic problem, and we're going to do this twice today. Ema seifa, look at the second part. Hashborin chibur l'tumah v'letahara. A pond, it is viewed as connected for tumah and for tahara. So if you're, every time it says not for tumah, not for tahara, or yes for tumah, yes for tahara, we're going to say but not for something else, right? The reverse. So you're going to have the opposite conclusion. L'tumah l'tahara hu da'avi chibur halin yan nesech lo avi chibur. You're going to say, wait, ashborin is chibur specifically for tumah and tahara, but it's not for yan nesech, for example. That would be ridiculous. So now we cannot infer anything from here. It's inconclusive. Okay, second source. I said now we're going to go to the first case of our Mishnah, which you can see why they're going to use this. Tana natal tamashpech umadad letoch tzlochito shel avei kochavim v'chazar umadad letoch tzlochito shel Yisrael. So you take the funnel and you pour from it into the cod of the jug of the non-Jew, and then you use the same funnel for the Jews, turning out amabed. Im yesh bo kevet yayin asul. If there's some wine left over in the funnel, it's a problem. Ha kevet yayin b'mai kamet asla. Now, what's in this funnel, how on earth could it be forbidden if not by, because no wine of the non-Jews got into there, right? Lav b'nitzok, is it not nitzok? And then shmamina, nitzok chibur. And then what do you say? Nitzok is chibur. Okay? And then you would say that since you're going into three vessels, right, what's at the top one is already not really viewed as connected. But what goes through the funnel and into there is all considered connected. So if there's wine that's in there that was connected with the wine that went down into the bottom of the non-Jews jug, which had some droplets of yayin nesech in it, then the droplets that are above are considered a ta'arovet with yayin nesech, and it's forbidden. Again, we're going to get to the whole sugya tomorrow about how yayin nesech is osur b'kol shehu. Any amount of yayin nesech forbids. So even though it's just drops, which I meant to mention yesterday also, because we were talking about those droplets in a mixture forbid. Okay, even in any amount. Wine and wine, that's going to be the whole topic for tomorrow. Okay. So isn't that shmami? Now the Gemara says, which we had the same question yesterday. Wait, so then shmami na nitzok chibur, right? It sounds like nitzok chibur for yayin nesech, and that's what we were trying to prove. However, they say no. Because Tani Rabbi Chia understood our Mishnah talking about some other issue. It has nothing to do with nitzok. What's the issue? Shepechasto slichuto. Okay, we actually had this before in Daf Nun Vav, this concept. It's when you're pouring into the funnel, from there into the jug, it overflows. The jug overflows. He poured more than what the jug could hold, and from there it went into the funnel. So actually the wine that was in the bottom got mixed up, not through chibur, right? Not through nitzok, not through pouring. It actually, some of the wine got mixed up, and theoretically, some of the wine, the droplets that are in this funnel, could have come actually from below. So now they say, okay, if so, aval lo pchastot tzlochito mai lo. So if Rabbi Chia says, the Mishna is all talking about a case of pchastot tzlochito, it sounds like he would say, if it didn't overflow, and he didn't pour too much, it would be permitted. Right? That's what it sounds like. In which case, tifshad nitzok eino chibur. Then we should be able to prove from here against Rav Huna. The nitzok clearly doesn't work. To which the Gemara says, no. Pchastot tzlichutot tifshad lachtas. What's clear to Rabbi Chia is, for sure, if it overflowed, the wine in the funnel will be forbidden. Nitzok tibai, but he doesn't know. He wasn't talking about that. You can't assume because he said the Mishna is talking about that doesn't mean it also can't be talking about the other case. He doesn't know what nitzok chibur, whether it's chibur, whether it's not chibur, and therefore that's not conclusive to go knock out Rav Huna. Okay, next source, Tashma, as I said, we go now to the second line in our Mishnah. Hamaremi kli lekli. Et shemaremi menu mutal. Now we're going to do again an inference, and then we're going to have the same problem as before, where you can infer from the beginning, you can infer the opposite from the end, but we'll get there soon because we're going to have a few minor things to figure out before we get there. So first we're going to do our first inference. Ma'aremi kli lekli. So notice what it says. You're pouring from one to the other. Now there's an assumption here that there's, and it's going to be hard to understand, and we'll see the Gemara is going to somewhat reject this, but there is some concept of three parts. There's the part where you're pouring from one kli. This is not through a funnel, so it's a little different. You're pouring from one kli to another, and then there's some airspace in between. So there's what's in the middle, There's what's in the top vessel and the bottom vessel, or first and second. They don't have to be up, down, but first, second, assume the top one's going to be a little higher, and then there's going to be a little airspace. You're not pouring it like one right on top of the other, but there's a little space in between. So it says, when you're doing this, the one at the top that stays in the top vessel is permitted. Hadebeni beni asur. Sounds like if there was anything though in the middle airspace, that would be forbidden. Shmamina nitzok chibur. Sounds like nitzok is chibur, because why would the part that was in between be forbidden if not because of nitzok? This obviously adds a major problem, especially according to our understanding of nitzok, which is what the Gemara is going to ask right now. In nitzok chibur, if you're saying when you're pouring it's all connected, afilu degave demana nami litzar, whatever's in the upper kli is going to be, the first kli is going to be forbidden as well, because nitzok goes all the way back to where it's coming from. So that definitely can't work. Okay, so they say no. In nitzok halokashya dekamakatev kitufe. So they say maybe there's different ways of pouring. Okay, there's pouring the way you pour from a pitcher of water in the table, right? You pour and you're just continually pouring. That's what we've been thinking of until now. But you could also pour in short bursts. Now, if you pour in short bursts, then really, even if you say nitzok is chibur, what's at the top and stays in the top vessel is not really going to be called nitzok. And only you're going to forbid this beni. So they now limit it to say, let's go back to the inference and say the beni is asur, because only what's in the top is permitted, what's in the bottom is forbidden, and what's in the middle, since it said what's in the top is permitted, we'll assume what's beni is asur, and that's because of nitzok. And you would have to say it's only in a case where they poured it very short, stop, short, stop, short, stop, short. Keep doing it in very short, and then the nitzok is really only that part in the middle. However, right, and therefore, mikol makom nitzok chibur. And then you could say nitzok chibur, and again, this is all to try to prove Rav Huna. Why did he say nitzok is chibur by yayin nesech? And we can prove it from our Mishna. But now we're going to go to what I said we're going to go to, which is the inference from the end, from the second part of the Mishna is the opposite. It says the one that it goes into, the second vessel, is going to be forbidden, the wine in there, which implies hadebeni shari, whatever's in between is permitted. Therefore, okay, it was kind of a waste of time that we went through all this thing to say kitufe and all that, because maktiv kitufe, because in the end it wasn't going to be a good proof in the first place, because it's an inconclusive, just like the first one. It could go. The first part you could get to one conclusion, from the second part you get to the other. This is always, it goes down the Gemara all the time, where a source will bring the two extremes and won't talk about the middle, and then you just don't know what the middle is, and therefore you can't conclude anything. Now we're going to bring a braita, last source, to try to prove Rav Huna. As I already told you, we're not going to succeed. Tashma ha'ma'areh michavit lebor. So you're pouring wine from a barrel into the pit. Kiluach hayoreh misfat chavit lamata asur. Now we assume, this is just like all our other cases, we have a Jew pouring water from a barrel to the pit. The pit is the non-Jew's wine, and there could be yayin nesech in there. Kiluach hayored misfat chavit lamata asur. Anything that's coming from the sides of the barrel that is going down into the pit is going to be forbidden. So what do you see here? That's nitzok, if not, right? Of course it's nitzok. Well, no, because Tirgama Rav Sheshet explained that. And again, you could say that that's Rav Huna's source. It's just Rav Sheshet has a different way of understanding that source. Rav Sheshet explained it that that's not the case at all. Notice it doesn't say who's pouring what into where. Sheshet says it's ba'ovei kochavim ha'ma'areh ta'ate mikocho. It's a non-Jew pouring the Jew's wine, maybe even into the Jew's pit, okay? And the issue is that whatever goes from the edge of the barrel into the pit is forbidden because it moved how? From the koch of the non-Jew. Now, we learned that the rabbis forbade anything. Remember we talked about mizigah, if they would make the mixture of the wine, they forbade, because anything that comes from the action of the non-Jew is going to be as if the non-Jew touched it, and it's going to be forbidden, because maybe they'll albeit, or even if there's not really, it's just close enough. It's happening from their action, and we're going to forbid it, right? Because they're not touching the wine, and that's usually what's needed. But this Gzera D'Rabbanan, that we're going to forbid kocho. And Rav Sheshet said, you misunderstood the case. It has nothing to do with this nitzok and the pouring of it, the stream. It has to do with something completely different, which is if the non-Jew is the one who's moving it, then it's going to be forbidden. So now they say, wait, if you're saying anything that's moved from the kocho of the ovei kochavim, afilu gava dechavit nami mitzar, it's not just what's at the edge of the barrel that was going down, everything in the barrel, because he moved all the wine in the barrel, should be forbidden. So they say no, because koch ovei kochavim derabanan hudasir, it's only an isur derabanan. And therefore, they only forbade what actually came out of the barrel, not what was left in the barrel. Okay, so they didn't take the gzera derabanan that far. This is only a gzera, because it's a gzera, they drew the line. So what we're left with in this sugya is that Rav Huna says, even though the Mishna in Tumantara says nitzok is not chibur, however, Rav Huna says it is for yayin nesech. We brought 4 attempts to try to prove. Where does Rav Huna get this from? We weren't really successful. You could say the 4th maybe is his proof, but Rav Sheshet clearly understands it otherwise. And with that, we're left. Some of the Rishonim Paskin like Rav Sheshet, those like Rabbeinu Tam, who, as we know, already discussed, who was Baal Tosfot, they were in general more mekel with yayin nesech. They, one second, I just want to make sure I have this right, that Rabbeinu Tam, I think, permits, and that others forbid. Okay, so one second. Let me just get it. Second. So what happens when you read something right before class? I went to read the Rashi posek shenitzok is chibur. Okay, based on what Rav Chisda had said, based on this. All right, because we're going to get to a case where Rav Chisda, I didn't get to that yet, but based on the fact that Rav Chisda is going to be conscious of Rav Huna's issue, so he paskins the chumrah, and then Rabbeinu Tam, right, paskins like Rav Sheshet. I just said the opposite by accident. But he is lenient like Rav Sheshet. Okay, like I said, Rabbeinu Tam often has the lenient opinion here on yayin nesech, because again, he was living in Ashkenaz, in France, where there was a lot of interactions with the non-Jews, and it was going to create issues. So he was trying to be lenient in many cases. Okay, now, and obviously on the basis of actual reasons to be lenient here. Because in the end, the sugya does seem to go against Rav Sheshet, against Rav Huna, because in the end they don't find a source. Okay, now we're going to see though, Rav Chisda was conscious of this chumrah of Rav, or this ruling of Rav Huna, and therefore Amar Rav Chisda lahana savyuta. Get back to these savyuta, the storekeepers who are selling wine. Rav Chisda said to them, Ki kailitu chamra lovdei kochavim, when you're measuring out your wine for the non-Jews, katifu katufe, do it with the short spurts, and therefore you won't ruin all the wine in your barrel. Inami, here we're going to have another way to do it, which doesn't sound so realistic to me, but napitzu naputze, throw it, okay? Try to have it really disconnected so that you really end up with no issue of anything. Amalahu Rava, lahanu shafuchai, and Rava said to the people who were pouring wine out, again, pouring wine to non-Jews, ki shafchitu chamra. Okay, this is actually a different situation. This has to do with what Rav Sheshet said. This isn't even necessarily pouring for non-Jews. Here, he says, what did we mention? Rav Sheshet said there's this problem of kocho. So he says, when you're pouring out the wine, lo likra vovei kochavim l'sayah b'hdaichu. Don't have a non-Jew join you in pouring the wine. Okay, meaning, imagine, big heavy barrels. You can't do it yourself necessarily, so they would do it with 2 people. Don't use a non-Jew. Now, kocho is a problem. Kocho is a problem. It's a gzera d'Rabbanan. So we're only going to be strict when it's completely the koch of the ovei kochavim. But comes Rava and says, don't even do it with them, because what might happen? Dilma mashtilu v'shaditu le'aleh. You might need to take a break for a minute, and you'll let go. And then the non-Jew will be pouring completely on their own, and that will completely destroy everything. By the way, I wanted to mention this, and these are really cases of hefsed merubah, right? You're pouring wine from your barrel. If you accidentally let the non-Jew, right, get in the way, it's going to ruin your entire barrel of wine. That's a lot. That's a big loss. It's one of the reasons why they say that Rabbeinu Tam is lenient, specifically also if it's the big hefsed. And it was going to ruin all their wines just because they did, nitzok and all that. Like, why be strict when it's there's always, or not always. They try to find heterim when it's a hefsed merubah. So this would be a good case if I have say merubah, but he says, better try to avoid the problem. Here we're talking about a different issue, not the nitzok. We're talking about the problem that Rav Shesha brought up about the kolcha. Ha'u gavra. Now we're going to talk about a different way that they would carry wine from one to the other. They would use a siphon. It's called a gishta and a bat gishta. A gishta is a long pipe and a short pipe. Okay, so they would attach these two pipes of different lengths from one barrel to the other. And the way it would work like a straw. You know how you can but a siphon, it would siphon the wine out from one and bring it to the other. So it was a way of transferring the wine from one to the other. So he was doing it. It's a good way to do it, that no one's touching it. It's all good. But there was a case, he was transferring wine from the gishta to through this gishta bakishta solution. Some people just call it a gishta, whatever. It's like a siphon. Now the Ovei Kochavim went and put his hand right where the wine was coming out into the other barrel. Now, what's happening? The wine's all moving. Asrei Rava lekule chamra. Rava forbade all the wine. Amarle Rav Papa l'Rava, Amarle Rav Adabarman l'Rava, Amarle Ravina l'Rava. One of the three people, Rav Papa, Rav Adabarman, and Ravina, said to Rava, "What are you doing? B'mai? Why were you so strict here? B'nitzok? Was it because you viewed the way the siphon was working, that it was all one continuum? And Shmat Minan, Nitzok Chibor. And then, we have this big machloket between Rav Sheshet and Rav Huna. And are you saying that you paskin that Nitzok is Chibor?" To which the Gemara, either he answered or the Gemara answered, Shanei Hatam de Kule Chamra Agishtu Bakishta Greer. This whole siphon thing is a totally different system. If I'm pouring, I can control it, I can stop, I can this. We're not necessarily going to view nitzok as chibur, but in a siphon, where all the wine was going to be siphoned out by the siphon, we have to view this as all one continuum, and as if this is one area, space of wine. And therefore, he forbade it. Okay, even though they were in two different barrels, but because it was being siphoned from one to the other, and all of it was going to go, by the way, the commentaries say, if it was siphoning in a way that not all the wine was going to go, and the wine on the sides, let's say, would have stayed, if it was siphoned in some particular manner, there wasn't everything, that everything wouldn't be forbidden. But you would forbid, the wine that was going through. Amar Mar Zutra, last topic for today. Amar Mar Zutra b'rei Rav Nachman, knish knin shari. Okay, it's a funny word, knish knin. What is this? This is, the siphon would work with gravity. It seems they would do something to get it started, and then it would work through gravity. Or something like that. I don't know exactly. The Quran has a note about it. You can read in a picture if you have it. Okay. Knish kin shari. This is a straw that has two mouths to it. Okay? So it's one straw with two openings. This is a fascinating heter. You can drink from this straw together with an idolater, even if you're drinking wine. V'hanimile dekadin pasak Yisrael. This limitation becomes a little bit complicated because it's only if the Jew stops drinking first. Aval kadam pasak ovei kochavim lo. We know what happens when you stop drinking from a straw. What happens? The rest of it was still in the straw. That was kind of, could have been in your mouth, right? You don't like to share those kind of things with people because of the germs. Goes right back in. So, or wine that was moved by the idolater with their mouth goes right back into the wine. So if they stop first, the problem. I don't know how you make sure that you stop first, not them. It's a really good question, but he said it's fine as long as you make sure that you stop drinking first. Rav bar Rav Huna, and based on this heter Mar Zutra, Rav bar Rav Huna ikla lebei Reish Galut. He comes to the Reish Galuta's house, which, by the way, you remember the Reish Galut always had all these guests, and apparently also some non-Jewish guests. Sharila the Mishna b'Knishkin, and he permitted the people there to drink with these. It was obviously a way that people would drink. Ika de Amre, starting just finishing up till the next Mishna on the next daf. Ika de Amre. Some people say Rav bar Rav Huna gufe ishte b'Knishkin. He himself did it. Forget about that he told people to do it. He himself would drink from it, which shows even more so how this is permitted. Okay, so we finished up with the topic of Mashicha. Is it Kona, is it not Kona? With the last question on Rav Ashi. Then in the end, we knock out Rav Ashi's opinion. And we conclude that Mashicha is Kona by Avdei Kochavim, even though, as I said, Rashi doesn't agree with it, halacha l'maaseh. Then we had cases where we talked about pasak, and we wanted to know, does pasak apply also to non-yayin nesech issues? This issue that a prerequisite of a kinyan is you have to have agreed on a price, and in the end we prove yes it is. Okay, and we prove it from a different Mishna in Bava Batra, in a case that happened where they passed it based on the Mishna, and then we had this, and that was basically because of this case that came up about selling the land, and then they didn't know what to, right? There was Machlokes Abaye and Rav Yosef, and in the end they proved that we can learn it from this Mishna Bava Batra. And then we had all these different languages of what is pasak. It's not just to agree on a price. You could say, I agree whatever 3 people assess or 4 people, what each different term really means and what the requirements are. Then we went to, and then we also had that side case where the price changed. And then we, in the end, posted it. Actually, you weren't committed to your original arrangement, even though you had set a price. Okay, then we had the case of these 2 cases in the Mishnah of pouring the wine through the funnel, and the drops that are there are a problem, and then also pouring from one kli to the other. The top is fine. Yeah, the first one is fine. The second one is not. But really, the main topic ended up becoming this nitzok. Is nitzok chibur? Is it not? Rav Huna said it was. And we don't know on what basis, because the Mishna said it's not for Tumantara. And then we said, well, maybe not for Tumantara, maybe it is for there. Or maybe we can learn it from case 1 in our Mishnah, maybe we can learn it from case 2 from our Mishnah, maybe we can learn it from this bright. At the end, we really couldn't conclusively prove that Rav Huna was right. And then Rav Chisda, anyway, was Machmir Lakim. And we saw Rav Sheshet disagreed, because he understood that last source differently. And then we got off on that topic of how he understood about kocho of a non-Jew. And we finished up with the knishknin, this special, unique straw, where they would both be drinking from, ultimately, the wine they were drinking was coming from the same place, and yet we permitted it under certain conditions. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Shishma B'Salat Tovat.